Hello and welcome to this episode of Making Connections, the BattleCON analysis show where I, your host, Marco DeSantos, try not to do so horribly at playing BattleCON online. In the previous video, I asked you guys if you liked the new format, and guess what? You guys did. So, I will be providing much more of that kind of content, but don't worry, some of you have expressed the idea or the notion that you also like my live gameplay commentary. So, I will kinda alternate between the two, or maybe do two in-depth analysis for every one live gameplay I do. Regardless, neither of them will be going away, and you can expect to see both kinds of content on this channel as much as you can. So, welcome to this episode, which if you've seen the title of this video, you know what it is. It's about learning from your mistakes. BattleCON is a game with basically no randomness, meaning that if you lose the game, it is usually your fault. There is something you could have done differently, there is something you could have done otherwise that would have possibly made you win the game. And I think it's very useful to learn from your mistakes. However, how does one learn from their mistakes? Oftentimes, many people in the fighting game community, as well as many people who are teaching anything really, will just tell you, go out there and fail, then you will learn. I'm not a firm believer of that. You see, if the person who fails doesn't understand why they fail, if the person who fails doesn't see the things they could have done differently, and then they learn nothing. They just get frustrated, they just get angry, and they just, fail. And that's really disheartening. And a lot of fighting games, and a lot of people who teach fighting games tend to forget that simply blindly, repeatedly playing the game will not make you better, will not make you a better player. Instead, it's highly possible that it just makes you a worse player. So, in this video, I'm gonna show you guys an example of how I learned in BattleCON Online. And I will show you two games. One game will be, they're actually a rematch. So the first game is me against a person named Sanji, who's playing Cadenza, and I'm playing Riflem. And in that game, I completely lose. Then I queued up again, and then fought him immediately afterwards, once more. And that time, I win. So, I will show you guys the things that I learned in between that, between those two games that made all the difference. So, without further ado, let's go to the replay. Boom. I already had it queued up. And we can start watching the replay now. So, Riflem versus Cadenza, it's heavily weighted towards Cadenza because Riflem doesn't really have a lot of great ways to trade, and Cadenza's really good. Substantial becomes basically a useless style because Cadenza can just iron body through it. So, this is why, number one, this is part of the gameplay matchup that I try to do correctly, which is I identified that transformative install is very good in this matchup because install can turn into a monstrous 8 to 10 power attack. And even if Cadenza can anti an iron body to gain stun immunity or spend it to gain stun guard infinity /99, it doesn't matter if he's dead. So that's the game plan I'm going for. And that's not the wrong game plan. But what happens next basically ruins my day. So all in all, you'll see in this gameplay that I continuously make small mistakes that kind of pile up into a huge disadvantage. You'll see this in the first 3 beats. So, I end up going against a hydraulic press, which is absolutely horrible because it will always trade positively against me. Because not only will he soak, the effect of press means that he will gain power equal to the amount of damage I deal to him. So even if I deal 4 damage to him right now, he'll swing back for 7. And that's not good. As Riflem, you don't want to get really low at the start because the moment you're up against a counterattacker and you don't kill them, you will lose because this will happen. Oh, I hit you for 5 and then you hit me back for 7 and I die. That's just pretty much how the matchup works. So as Riflem in this kind of matchup, you want to be ahead on life. So here is where I start making all the mistakes. I experimental dodge fearing his clockwork shot. Not a bad play. But what I do in this situation is what makes it such a bad play. My opponent plays battery dodge, a typical cadenza move. It's fine that I didn't clash it on purpose. What my huge mistake was doing this. Going into this positioning. Now you're thinking to yourself, that's not a bad position to be in, right? Well, yeah. But at the same time, I could have placed myself differently. Perhaps here, in the middle, or here, in order to avoid my opponent simply getting a free beat. Because I play residual drive. Now, there's a few things that I'm scared of at this range, right? I'm scared of the grapnel. I'm also scared of the still present threat of the clockwork shot. But one big thing that I failed to realize here is that I only talk or consider grapnel grasp, which is the fastest attack Cadenza can play when he's on a battery beat. So I'm like, I'll just residual and drive that, because residual gives me stun guard 2. Haha, I will trade positively against Cadenza. I am a genius. And then I forget the fact that he has other bases. And that in this situation, the attack pair that he plays actually beats almost everything I do. In fact, it literally beats everything I do unless I clash it, which is absurd, right? And the only way for me to clash it, by the way, is to play substantial. And that's not good enough because he can just drive after the clash and I would still lose. So just look. Just look and watch my intense disappointment. Grapnel strike. I couldn't have done anything about it. Go fast, he'd have the stun guard. He hits me. I end up into the middle space. Bam, I get stunned. Oh, not a good day to be. I'm now down 7 life against Cadenza, and it's not a good place to be.
Let's begin.
So, what other mistakes do I do? Did you see that? Did you see that huge mistake I just made? My opponent still has Clockwork Shot in his hand. One of my natural counters to Clockwork Shot as Rifflem is doing Alchemic Grasp to use Grasp's on-hit effect to push Cadenza, and then using Alchemic's retreat effects to retreat back and dodge the Clockwork Shot. However, that only works if I hit my opponent at range 2. And what range did I just purposely move myself out of? That's right, range 2. Oh, such a disappointing beat.
This should do.
So I'm like, I realized too late that I made this mistake, so I just play Alchemic install to hopefully get an install stack in, you know, get my install fast enough because I can't afford to be slow anymore and trade with install. So I have to go fast. Hopefully I retreat and get some cool attack out of it. It's probably not going to be enough. My opponent's going to play the Clockwork Shot. And the sad thing about all of it is that by placing myself in that positioning, I actually had no recourse to Clockwork Shot. I couldn't even clash it. So it just goes to show how poor that positioning was. Because if I had just stayed here and done Alchemic Grasp, I could have at least threatened the Alchemic Grasp, but I didn't. And this results in me eating 7 damage. That's not a fun amount of damage to take. So it doesn't matter. I heal up. My opponent will then...
Away.
So, of course, I just retreat 1, thinking, it's a done deal, you know? I can't do anything about this, so I might as well just let my opponent hit me, and I'll need to take the center board position, you know? And there's the other mistake. By placing myself here, my opponent actually has a free hydraulic drive. Instead of positioning myself here and still possibly threatening the burst while he had his grapnel down. You see how many mistakes I'm making this game? All of these are compiling on top of each other to form a really, really bad game. He's preparing defensive measures. Did you hear that? It doesn't matter, you know. I'm dodging this beat. It's fine. Cadenza usually can't clash this dodge easily. So hey, I made it out alive. And of course I didn't corner myself against a Cadenza, because who's crazy, right? And I make the last mistake I make this game. I retreat instead of advanced with that dodge. Now why would I do that? Why does that matter? Because my opponent is now at range 4 from me. I do not have a great way to counter the move that he will play next. So it's a 50-50, because he can do Grapnel Strike or he can do Grapnel Burst. Both of which will kill me. Both of which have different priorities. So I have no way to hit him. And it's just a done deal, man. So here I hope for the strike and hopefully dodge it. But burst, I can't actually beat the burst. Because even if I hit him with a shot, even if that happens, he can just anti an Iron Body or spend an Iron Body and still hit me anyway. So it doesn't matter. The grapnel burst comes in and I die. Such is the curse of playing Rifflem against a heavyweight character. If I don't have the life total advantage, they will just run through all of my attacks and then kill me. So, I made a lot of mistakes that game, right? Poor positioning, poor card management, as well as poor reads led me to this situation where I basically had no way out of it outside of clashing a grapnel burst, apparently.
Calculations were incorrect. Target neutralized. Returning to automatic control.
So that was horrible. That was real bad, right? Really bad. But what can I do? So, let's identify the key mistakes that I made that game. Number 1, poor positioning. I purposely put myself in the most horrible positions. And that's because I usually didn't consider my own discard piles when making those positioning choices. Instead, I was just like, oh, I'm against Cadenza, might as well go far away. Not the best idea. Not a great idea. Number 2, I also made a few wrong reads, especially at the start. Those first 2 beats actually cascaded into a huge wave of mistakes, and it just spelled death for me, right? So those are the important things we have to consider. Positioning, as well as card management. I need to make sure that those are correct. Also, my game plan of being ahead in life means that I should have stayed ahead in life so that I didn't end up in that situation with the grapnel burst, wherein no matter what I did, my opponent would kill me anyway. So that's the key mistakes that I've identified. And I actually did identify those in the middle of those 2 games. So in the next game, I start applying it. So we will see how we get there pretty soon. Let me just load the video up here. All right, video loaded. Bam. This is the second one. Once again, we're placed into a game with Sanji.
Target acquired. Executing.
He is going to execute me, he says. But maybe not. So, number 1, we learn from our mistakes. We do not put Alchemic in the discard pile. That way we can threaten to counter his Clockwork Shot. Now I'm starting to do correct hand management. I'm also putting Substantial away because my opponent can just simply anti-reactively or spend reactively and still hit me for a ton of damage. So Substantial isn't that good in this matchup. So now my discards are halfway decent at least. Except for the fact that I still have Grasp here. Because I'm a Dumbo. A really, really big Dumbo.
This should do.
So I applied my learnings, but not so well. It's fine. So I start the game like I did last time with a transformative install. My opponent, however, does a battery dodge instead. This clashes, and this kind of starts to show how one bad read or one bad play can lead to a spiral of like destruction and doom. Because Rifflem as a character loves clashing. because he can get his bases back fast after he puts his reagents on them, which means he gets to use those bases more often than, you know, once every 3 beats. So he can hyper buff them really fast. And the fact that it happened to my install, which, as I've told you guys, is the key base in this matchup, this will, well, you'll see the payoff later on. So we clash. My opponent makes a big mistake here and does not play shot. So I get a free transformative burst. The transformative burst is really powerful. I get to retreat 1 space. So I'm starting to apply that learning once again. Just because I'm against Cadenza doesn't mean I want to just retreat the most amount of space as possible. You know, I retreat just enough to dodge his attack and still give myself options for the next beat. Smart move, Marco, for once, right? So I hit him for a measly amount of damage, right? And then I changed the stun guard reagent to the power reagent, because the power reagent is the key reagent in this matchup, because I want to one-shot kill him at some point. And of course, now by placing myself at this position instead of, you know, here at the end of the board, I'm now able to dodge this battery beat, because battery is really scary. So I'm dodging this beat. So why residual dodge? Because it gives me end of beat movement. So if my opponent does any movement, such as doing hydraulic drive, I'm able to place myself in a favorable position.
Let's begin.
So I advance 3 spaces to avoid it. Of course, standard. My opponent will then advance once and then advance once to end there. So of course, end of beat, I will advance 1 into the center space.
Let's try
This is really fun. Now, my opponent...
Default combat routine.
Now, in the previous game, if you didn't notice, my opponent barely played burst outside of doing that final grapnel burst where it was guaranteed to work. As Cadenza, it's actually not advisable for you to be bursting a lot because, well, I don't know, you like being in melee. So, I actually take a risky play by playing this experimental install, but it pays off because I read my opponent's clockwork shot at this point. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna even clash your clockwork shot. I'm gonna anti-power on top of my experimental install. You're gonna anti-power? I'm gonna anti-power.
sharpening.
Now, since I know that experimental also has the end of beat effect that allows me to put a reagent on my base if I get hit, I know my opponent won't get stunned because he's playing clockwork shot, right? So I trade here. I am ahead of life. I'm ahead in life, like in my previous, you know, want lists. So now that I have that life lead, I'm able to make a play like this where I just trade with Cadenza. I trade 5 to 7. That's not bad for, you know, fighting against Cadenza's clockwork shot. We're still at even life. However, my experimental install works, and I'm able to put extra range onto install. And in case you guys don't see, install is now range 1 to 2 with 6 power. And that plays a lot into the end game. Now, my opponent is also in a bad spot. He now doesn't have any of his hit confirmed, which means burst is a guaranteed safe beat. If my opponent doesn't do dodge, I basically get a free beat. So now you're seeing it, right? Positioning's working out, my card lock and my hand management, even my opponent hand management is working really well.
Station complete.
And this is all an effect of me pressuring him with the correct positioning for once. And there we go, transformative burst. I once again burst away from his mechanical press. And then I am able to transform, guess what? The stun guard reagent into more power reagents. This transformative play has done me wonders this game. And that extra power works a lot into this matchup. That power is so useful. So Cadenza will now have free reign, right? And if you're a good BattleCON player, you will probably corner yourself in this situation, which my opponent does. That's a smart move. Indeed it is. A truly smart move. So what do I do in this situation? My opponent has cornered himself. I don't know what to do, but one big thing I have to notice here is that my opponent has access to hydraulic drive, which means my dodge play will not work, because even if I dodge back 3 spaces, my opponent can advance 3 and then still kill me, or rather deal damage to me. So with no recourse left, my opponent only having grasp as a trick, all Cadenza can really do is trade, right? That's all he can do at this situation. And in fact, with press and clockwork down, Cadenza doesn't deal more than 5 damage. So I can basically come out of this beat winning if I just residual strike vanilla. So my opponent will deal some amount of damage. He'll give himself power. I don't think I anti-power here. No, I anti-priority, just in case. Oh, no, wait, no, I anti-power. Never mind. I anti-power, we trade at this point. And it's the hydraulic drive because he was expecting a dodge bat. So now I've managed my opponent. Now what's he doing? Is he gonna advance? Is he gonna retreat? And this is where my opponent makes a mistake. He's scared of my dodge. He doesn't want me to dodge. So he stays here. And that's not a big mistake, right? Because he has Clockwork Shot coming back into his hand. So why wouldn't he want to be in this position? There's barely anything Marco can do without his burst. Because without my burst, I can't experimental burst to clash the Clockwork Shot. See? Now you're seeing what my opponent is thinking, right? However, by doing this, he has also disabled his burst. That works into the late game as well. So I hit him for 5. So see, we trade 5 to 6, and I'm coming out ahead in life. And this is where everything kind of falls into place. I go to range 2 to avoid a special grasp or something silly like that, right? And if in case you didn't notice, I've been buffing my install this entire game, like I said I would. And therefore, substantial install becomes a 1-7-4. My opponent's only recourse at this point is to dodge. I kid you not, it is the only thing he can do to not die. Because even if he does clockwork, I will have 7 plus 2, 9 power, and he only has 6 health. So even if he has soak 3 from clockwork, he will die. Therefore, my opponent's only recourse is to dodge. But given the past few beats, he has not been dodging, and Clockwork Shot seems like such a safe move right now. So, in the end, this is what happens. My opponent tries to read my dodge. Because he's like, oh, he'll dodge, right? Because he's scared of the clockwork. But sadly, that's not what I was thinking at all. I just knew that I would be able to kill him. And therefore, I do. I just kill him. So, that positioning is just golden, right? That residual strike positioning allowed me to stay here and threaten the dodge so that my opponent was actually worried about dodge for once.
Knowledge is the only real power.
Dead. Victory. So, you see, a lot of things went differently that game, right? I was able to position well, and those great positionings were able to, well, allowed me to essentially win the game. And that's a big difference, right? Those two games happened literally within the same hour. They were literally one after the other. But because I was able to identify certain key things I was doing wrong in the previous game, I was able to apply changes in the new game which yielded results. And I think this is how most people should try playing the game of BattleCON. Don't just bump your head against the wall repeatedly thinking, oh, if I play enough games, I'll get better. It just doesn't work that way. No amount of practicing will ever make you better if you keep practicing the wrong things. So, I highly recommend using the useful replay feature to look at the game that you just played where you just lost and identify key mistakes that you made during that game and try to apply them in the next game. So if you don't know what to do, you can easily just go to the replay section by clicking your profile or something and then clicking for replays. And then watch games, dude. Just watch your games and see where you go wrong. Trust me. In BattleCon, hindsight is always 2020. You don't want to look at the beats where you go like, oh, if I had just played this attack instead. Because, you know, most of the time if you're a half decent player, most of the time those things are not your fault, you know. It's a 50-50. Your opponent could have done X or Y and you believed he would do X, but he did Y instead. That's on your opponent. That's not something you could have controlled. What you could have controlled was whether or not you anti the specific thing, whether or not you played a specific attack pair, in the situation wherein there was nothing that could beat that attack pair you could have played but didn't. Or, for example, in my situation, where I had multiple choices of where to dodge and reposition myself and continuously repositioned in the wrong places. So, that's pretty much this episode of Making Connections, and I hope you all watching have made that connection on whether or not losses are useful for you and how you can learn from your mistakes. As usual, if you guys like this video, please consider giving this video a like. Please also consider subscribing to the official Level 99 Games YouTube channel so you can keep appraised of everything that's the news, all the new podcasts, and all the awesome content we have for you on this channel. As usual, if you guys have any questions, comments, or suggestions, put them in the comment section down below. And if you want to be part of the Notif squad, just click the bell and you will be alerted whenever we do something or comment or post something really awesome for you guys. So, without much else to say, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget your 4th special action. And thank you, World of Indians. Thank you, and good night.